This is side one of tape 5 of our little series here that I told you on the last tape that we were going to entitle this From the Secrets of Enoch, but unfortunately I let time slip away and get away from me, and on the last tape we were discussing about this word Ariel, that he was one of the fallen extraterrestrial angels. He was a mighty one of great renown. He would probably be called in the Hebrew Yahuwah, which meant a great noble prince, the lord of space, and a lot of people might get bent out of shape if you call the adversaries that. But remember, my friends, they could very possibly be your brethren, and I believe that they were, that fell from grace. They fell from their position. And before you go being too judgmental, who are you? Have you fallen from grace? Are you outside of the will of the Almighty? Or are you one of those that's been written in the book, and that day you shall judge angels? Is that you, or do you know of anybody that dynamic, that magnificent, he who walks the chalk? It is a very narrow line, but we were discussing this Ariel, one of the falling extraterrestrial hosts. He's mentioned of in the books of Enoch. And isn't it a coincidence, as I started out on the last tape, talking about over there in Ariel in Israel, that there all of a sudden there's this instant city out there among the rocks and the hills, and we are building it. I'm talking about you, my friends. You are sending your money, what is it, $6 billion a year, you and Mr. Bush and all of your other fearless leader of der New World Order are sending their money to there to build this, the city of Ariel, like the fallen angel. Aye, that could be bringing some bad juju on them. But they're bringing these refugees from Russia, and they're putting them in these buildings and tents, and they're just taking it showed on the glass toilet here a while back on that CNN program, how there was some poor Arab there was holding his hand and said, look, I got title, I got deed to this land, this is my property. And here was these young, arrogant Israeli soldiers who were clubbing on him and pushing at him and laughing at him like, your paper doesn't mean diddly squat. We're building here. What are you going to do, you Palestinian Arab? Are you going to buck the Israel government? Are you going to upset America? Are you going to upset the UN? We can do what we want. We are God's chosen. This gives us a license to use and abuse anybody in the world. Unfortunately, I've met a lot of white people like that, or Semitic people. They get to say, my goodness, I am an Israelite. I'm a descendant of Adam. I'm one of Shem's kids. Ooh, I'm white, I'm uptight, and I'm out of sight. But, my friends, the Almighty's not going to tolerate that out of any of us. As we promised we would go to the secrets of Enoch, we understand why they were these so-called giants, as I've told you in other chapters, that it also, many places where they translated it giants, it meant great men of renown, and we're told by the angels that the spirits of these fallen angels were approximately, or supposed to have been, according to the great legend, 26 feet in height, and when they didn't keep their first estate, as we told you about the book of Jude, and it said that they intermarried with the people. Now I have trouble trying to fathom that, because if they did, they certainly had to know something about C-sections. I remember quite a few years ago when they started out with this mongrelizing nature, they started to take the male buffalo and they would breed them with a domestic cow, trying to get what they call beefalo. Well, quite obviously they had to use a cesarean section on all of those cows or they would have died, because the head was so big on the offspring it wouldn't pass down the birth canal. Now, anyway, getting back to these people and the intermingling here, they might do all this all right, but in the periods of the growth of the cells, they continue to grow as long as they're basic register back in the energy field continued to multiplication of these cells until they reached a norm between their celestial height and their physical height. And therefore, there was these giants in the land after those days, and after all of this intermingling of these Nephilim, as they were called, that came down with the mortal human type race here. Now, this is scriptural record. And it is because of the intermingling that every thought of these evil offsprings was evil continuously, and they were referred to as cannibals, C-A-N-A-B-A-A-L-S, cannibals. They were the priests of Baal whose worship was that of the adversary, and therefore they indulged in eating human flesh. This is how and where you get the word cannibal today, or cannibal from Cannibal. And the word Cana isn't something to be proud of because of the word, this is the word for Baal priest, and it started out over there. Every once in a while, someone says, I don't believe that unless someone canonized it. Well, then canonization might be all right, but I want you to know a lot of canonized individuals who act like their namesake. As I've told you before, that you need to go back and read the book of the two Babylons. The fact here, my friends, is quite clear, because that this evil came down upon man, because these powers of evil among these Asiatics moved into the upper Tarim Basin, and they started to seize the women of your progenitors and haul them off as captives, woo them with promises of power, and their intermingling with your race was a violation of the Almighty's law that He proposed to stop. Therefore, they wiped their seed from the face of the earth. My friends, what I have to do is back up here for 1 minute. You notice that we talk about they wipe their seed from the face of the earth, and we find, as I've pointed out, we have to keep that word eratz in mind, which means that area, that land, that world, or planet. So we believe and we know that there was great chaotic upheavals and a destruction of a lot of people, and we can assume that this is correct, and we can also assume that there was a duality that was taking place out there in the Diluvian age and these other worlds. I believe that, like I've cited to you and quoted to you before, especially, now I'm not out trying to sell Bibles, this is not my main thing, but the Farrar Fenton Bible in the book of Job, in the first chapter and the second chapter, it talked about when the sons and daughters of the Most High, that people failed to understand that they would be gathered together, and the great mount of the Almighty, or the UN of the Intergalactic Federation of Outer Space. I'm sorry, your God's not that big. You've got one of those itsy-bitsy gods, and he just hangs around the other side of the moon here. Well, then you better leave all this alone. But I'm talking about you have to understand what he was saying, that they gathered together. And Job is describing it, and also he explains there in both chapters. He repeats it twice because he wants you to understand it. If you didn't get it the first time, you should get it the second time. But the Farrar Fenton Bible is one of the few that gives a definite logical explanation. It says that the adversary was flying over the earth and landing on the earth. And I think your King James perversion that said he was hopping to and fro over the earth and jumping up and down on it. My. But anyway, let us go back and understand that there was evil, there was hanky-pank. Now, you can talk about a great war, but any great war that you read about, it could have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of different battles before the war was won. And a lot of times the battle is carried over, like our Second World War, many nations and island outposts and in remote areas. So this is what we're talking about, a great intergalactic diluvian catalytic upheaval, but a lot of people have to register it as just one world flood or in just one little small area. But I think it's very important that we know that it was over a wide area that I maintain, that covers and takes you into outer space, and you'll discover it even in that period before these events, that we know that Enoch, he knew about this, because he was told what was going to happen, and we find in the records of Enoch that these evil things that they always try to see then absorb your race through mongrelization. If they can't war against you, they can't destroy you, they can come in with this subtlety that they have. And they may have shrunk down a little bit in size over the last few thousand years, but there's still these evil personages that are there trying to do the same job. And they want to commit genocide against your race, whether you be black or whether you be yellow or whatever you are, they're out to destroy all of us. So the Almighty, he told Noah that because of this evil, he was going to remove all the people from that area, and he promised Noah and his family that they were family here, as it's erroneous, I think, that we have proved, and you may disagree with me on this one particular point, as I cited to you from Ezekiel 14, where it says that Noah and his he did not save neither son nor daughter, but we're talking about a Noah-type people, and maybe this king, he had sons, I said before. Well, I don't know the reason, but I know that there's something very strange there. So let's go back to the point that the Almighty promised Noah that he and his, what I call family, or was he talking about his race, would be saved out of the destruction that was to come. And someone said, why didn't Noah migrate? Because Noah was living in an area that was the land that he knew, and its perimeters were the, a lot of people believe were the high mountains of the Himalayas, but I don't believe so. But anyway, reaching to the lower mountain ranges and foothills, and this was the area where a lot of people seem to think, and I know a lot of my friends think, that God says, you stay because I want you to cut off this mongrel breed. I want you to destroy this evil that has been established there. Now, don't go getting all filled up with crocodile tears and wonder about what God is doing to these poor mongrel hybrid falling Nephilim whose spirits are not lost to the Father. He knows what to do with them. So you stop worrying about the Almighty's business, and one of these days you'll wish to God that he had some means to start another flood here to eliminate some of these people who are racist, who hate you because you're white and because you're American and because you're Christian. And so when the Most High commanded him, Noah did exactly what he was told. But my friends, as I say, this is one side of the coin. But I believe that also that there was an ancient race of people, that there were Noahic type people that lived on another planet, and they escaped through a great spaceship. Now, but I'm being fair here, my friends. I'm telling you what a lot of other people believe, and the record shows that somebody was spared here in this area. But let's look and examine, as I say, if it wasn't a greater, wider, more encompassing thing of a great magnitude, that we have not had the intelligence or the ability or saw any signposts where to look for and wipe away the dust of centuries of mystery and look underneath and see, my, there's a great portrait of the family of the Almighty, a great panorama that shows down through the ages from where they came and where they're going, where they escaped to. And we see this awesome painting in our mind's eye here that paints the pictures of all of these great planets like the Greeks talk about and describe in Homer and his Iliad, and some of them that were locked in the death struggle one for another, and those that fled in a panic with the great ark ships of outer space to look for new frontiers or to find a place that was habitable, that they might survive, and like the Proverbs said, the 8th chapter, to come down, that they might dwell with earth men and survive till at such a greater time that the great Father, the great Lord of the outer space there, that he would deem it feasible that we, the fugitives, the offspring of the household of the Most High, that we had finally learned our lessons, and that we stood up to be counted, and we did not count ourselves equal with those that were the adversaries of the Most High, and that we were finally willing to bend the knee and to be returned and restored to the very household of the Almighty, as the Christ said, that where I am, that you might be also. But anyway, let us go back now, and we go back to this issue, which I consider just kindergarten issue. as I told you before, that the Hebrew word is Eretz, meaning that land. And then it goes on, we're further confused that the scriptures tell us that Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth, and they try to convince us that it was Noah and his sons and their wives and millions of creatures that they would have to take through the flood, and would have to take all the fauna of of Africa and of Asia and the whole earth, and he'd be required to take 14 of each, of every kind that was clean, and a pair of every other type. More than that, do you know how long that the 8 members of Noah would have had to take care of all these millions of animals? For 1 year, you say. How do you know? I turn to the 7th chapter of Genesis, and I read concerning this, that the flood, it started in the 600th year of Noah's life, and Noah went into the ark, and the flood water started in the 2nd month of the 600th year of Noah's life. And it tells us in the book of the Genesis, in the 8th chapter, that it was in the 2nd month, and the 17th and 20th day of the 600th and 1st year of Noah's life, before the flood waters abated, and they could get off the ark. They were on the ark for 12 months. Go back and look at it and add it up for yourself. That meant for 12 months they had to feed all of the creatures in the ark, and they had to have something to feed them with. Now you figure how big a supply fleet that you'd have to need to carry all the food for him. And I tell you this, if you ever tried to feed that many animals, then there would be more than all the zoos of the world put together, and you'd never got the job done. Just think, now they're talking about 3 sons and even their wives working at it. Noah had to feed all these animals and creatures and all of these specialized diets and temperature inversions and so forth. Talking about pitching. Hey, I would want to take care of the elephants, even with all that water coming down on the outside. 14 elephants. Think that over now, my friend. 14 elephants of each kind. As I told you, I believe another time in other talks we've discussed this, that there's this gigantic African elephant that cannot be domesticated, and also that we have the more docile Indian type, smaller elephant that can be domesticated, and he can be trained to work for certain periods of time, but when he gets tired, my friend, you better take his chains off and quit pushing it, because he's going to mash you. And so, as I said before, we have to know that, speaking here, that how large was this boat that Noah built? And how long did it take him to build it? And he built it out, as we're to understand, by the Babylonian account, as I call it here, and the book of Genesis said he made it out of good hard wood. And they try to tell us it's still existing over there in the mountains of Siberia, on the mountains where it supposedly came to rest, and the skeleton of the ark remains. And they try to tell us most of it is still intact, and our government has funded all kinds of expedition and put out hundreds of thousands of dollars for these people that don't know their history, they don't know their scripture, they never studied into the language, and they take it from some pictures that some aviators over the years have brought back, which appears to be something stuck in this perpetual ice and snow. And they try to tell us that men have seen the ark, and the ark's been there all this time, still a witness to the latter days, and trying to prove that their story is true. Now listen, my friends, if they would just look on a little bigger scope, that world or that planet. All right, let's say examine some of their other tales here. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to play the devil's advocate. I'm going to carry it all the way through. Let's say that it did mean Eretz. And in this tense, the Almighty was trying to say that land or that area, and it was pertaining to this world. And then after it started to rain, then it took a few of the local animals, a few yaks, and they took a few of the other animals that dwelled around. And all they had to do was just take those that were local and know that this high country at 10,000 feet, there wasn't too many animals to take on. Now, we don't have to worry about such a big problem if the story's true, and it did happen that way, but you say the waters went 15 cubits over the top of the high mountains. Yes, it had made it 6 miles deep over the whole land of Egypt, but I want you to know that if the waters had been 6 miles high over the land of Egypt and the rest of the world, it'd be impossible for those waters to have abated inside of a few months' time. What did the Almighty do? Pull the plug out like in a kid's bathtub after you're done bathing Junior and all the water runs down? They talk about the water receding. Oh, I want to know, for God's sakes, where did it recede to? And I've actually had some of these mental giants, these brain surgeon rejects, try to tell me, well, brother, the water just evaporated into the atmosphere. I said, you mean salt water doesn't evaporate? How come the oceans haven't evaporated? So we know that after a few months' time, it talks about the water rained, or abated, and they said that it rained. And we have a record here of how long it rained and how long the waters descended from the heavens and the fountains of the deep, which were discovered, as we explained before. They broke up from these great artesian underground wells and lakes here, and we find that the waters, they descended upon the earth and continued to fall for 150 days before they abated, and then we find at the end of the 11 months, all of a sudden the ground was dry. Huh. Where's the topsoil? Is there any of the soil sour? Now, my friends, let's stop and think. If you had water 6 miles deep over Egypt and Los Angeles, where do you think it would abate to? Let's be realistic. How could it and where could it abate to? Now, Noah, he lived in a great high mountain plateau. Some of us try to tell us when the judgment came and there was a great earthquake and great inundation from the sky, and the waters came down, and a great subterranean ocean, which was under the great Pilgrim plateau, was suddenly surging through, cracking ground, and the floor literally dropped out. And I don't deny this. As we said, the Chinese have a historical record on this about a man that they equated to Noah, and he was told and prepared, and it is a possibility. But let's go back to the Tarim Basin today, and you could see great ridges of stone stretching across it, and great masses of it that have broken and crumbled, and a possibility where the great foundations of the deep were discovered. And you see the faults, and you can see the standing stones of what was once a great crust, and the is known today as the Caspian Sea, and it's just the edge of what was once a great sea that covered much of the steppes of Asia, for these areas of Asia were under an Asiatic sea some 10,000 years ago, and is no longer there. Now, much of this area was subterranean ocean and cavern systems that were filled with water, and it was known as the Tarim Basin, which was once a great land mass, and the water was beneath it. And the judgment that fell, we find the foundations here of the deep were discovered, and they were broken up, and the waters of the heavens came down, and it rained for that period of time. Then you say, well, how did the waters ever abate? Now, the Tarim Basin, mind you, let's reason that out. That makes a little bit more sense. It's in Central Asia, and it's a great bowl, and it's one of the deepest sinkholes in the world. But before this flood, if it was allotted to this geographical area, and it was, as I say, just one battle in the Great War to clean up all of these planets of the universe, and the Almighty was using all different types and means to go after and to destroy and wipe these people out. All right, now we have to understand, as I said before, it was a very high plateau, and it was surrounded by some of the highest mountains on the face of the earth. And then when a tremendous earthquake or a series of earthquakes cracked open the mountain ranges surrounding that area, great cataracts of water ran down the Wang Ho River and down through the Mesopotamia. And I could tell you of Ur of the Chaldees, and the archaeological records will tell us that the water came down, reaching and passing through Ur. They became 68 feet deep in the Ur of the Chaldees when it went by, and it didn't, my friend, drowned everybody. Because part of the city was on a hill and some of the ridges round about, and those who came down below the water level of the ancient Ur were covered with mud. We find that our archaeologists have gone down and they can dig there, and out of the records that it was the right time, and it was what happened in that city. They didn't all drown because they were able to tell about it. Someone will say, well, what about the Negro? there weren't any Negroes involved in the flood. They were living in the area we know today as Africa. They were also in India. For we find those in India were largely a lesser society and under the administration of other strange people living in India that time, and we have the record, which is also significant. Now someone might say, but you're still surmising from the record that we have here. No, we're just talking to you about some facts which can be proved very, very conclusively with other passages of Scriptures, and we think when people understand these things, that you're going to understand their divine responsibility, which is to preserve the people of the Most High and to carry out His directions of the ever-living. Now we find in the 31st chapter of the book of Ezekiel, this is one of my favorite books, and I think he's very accurate. You know, in the past tapes, I've told you about how Ezekiel here, he visited the Eternal on more than one occasion, had whole air forces come with him, and those that guided and guarded and protected. This man was somebody very special that the Almighty confided in. But as I have told you in other tapes and audio books, as we call them, and studies, that those that translated them, I believe they really feared a lot of the things that were said in the books of Ezekiel, whereas they took out whole paragraphs and possibly whole chapters. But anyway, let's try to go and get out of it what we can. Now, in the 31st chapter of the book of Ezekiel, it says, God sends Ezekiel to talk to the Pharaoh of Egypt, and he says, Son of man, now my friends, I've pointed out to those of you who have heard my previous tapes that he meant, O thou son of Adam, thou of dawn, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian, he was a cedar Lebanon, with fair branches and great shadow and shroud, and of as the highest stature in his top, and he was among the boughs, and the waters made him great. Now, you know, in times past, many of you have heard me speak of this before. Here's a great parable of great understanding that anybody who calls himself a student of Scripture, he should understand this. And that it goes on, as I say, the thick boughs and the waters made him great. That what the Almighty is thus trying to explain, that the Assyrian, he was a great and a mighty empire. He was a great and tall tree, representing family tree with shadowing branches, for he stretched out over the whole earth, and the waters made him great. The waters here, we have to know from the allegories, the idioms, I've tried to tell you, the waters are racial streams. And this is the Turanian stream out of the steppes of Asia. The Turanian stream out of this Assyrian empire was so great, and her waters are so high, and had so many branches that the empire of Assyria became great because of the numbers of its racial streams. But we hear no outcry because of that and say racism. They're going to go over and they're going to flood out and they're going to destroy all of the other races because of their great numbers, and they will flood in if they don't kill them, that they will just simply absorb them and breed them out of existence. But it had so many branches. This is a historical fact. And small empires, because of a stream shot out in the Scripture, says, the Almighty further goes on to say, beginning with verse 5, Therefore his height was exalted among all of the trees of the earth, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters which he shot forth over all the fowls of heaven. It made their nest in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelled all great nations. And he was fair in his greatness, and the length of his branches, for his roots were by great waters. And the cedars in the garden of God could not hide from him, nor any tree in the garden of God was like unto him in his beauty. And I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all of the trees of the garden that were in the garden of God, they envied him. So, my friends, what we're saying, the Adamic man, when he come here and he saw this great and mighty and powerful Asiatic empire that I told you that in one of the past chapters in one of the audio books, where we talked about the ancient sages of China, where they wrote about this great lord that descended, and the great yin and the yang ships, who was able in a moment of time that he was able to cover all of the 9 lands. He was able to cover the whole world, is what he was saying, in a moment of time. Yes, my friends, the ancient Asiatic empires ruled this. And so if we're going to talk about some of the fallen trees that were in the garden, I believe that the Asiatic, just like you white boys, they were part of it and took a great fall. But what we find here is that the Almighty is saying, and above all the rivers of life and streams which were theirs, and above all the fowls of heaven which rested in their branches, and among all of the peoples of earth that were underneath her power, the power of this great established earth empire that this later, Johnny-come-lately, Semitic race was to invade and try to overpower. Now we find here that the Assyrian, he was the mightiest of all the trees in the Garden of Eden, but we shouldn't say, we should say back in Eden, because they had fallen to this earth just like the Adamic man. Now back in Asia and back in the time, in the beginning of the days of Eden, in the Assyrian, the most powerful tree that ever existed, we find here, if you look very closely here in verse 18, the Almighty says, "To whom art thou like in glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Yet shall thou be brought down with the trees of Eden into the nether parts of the earth, and you shall lie in the midst of the uncircumcised, with them that are slain by the sword." This is Pharaoh and all of his multitude, saith Yahweh God. So what he is stating here, if you read it and look at it very carefully, he talks about the most powerful tree that exists in all of the garden of the Almighty. So don't say the Almighty was a racist and didn't like the Asiatic people. He had a place there for them. But apparently, they who had the racial streams that went out of all of the trees of the gardens, or the different planets, because we're going to present some more besides those in just the last tape of these great poems of more than one ancient Oriental sage that talked about the magnificence of the great warrior gods of heaven, who the priesthood and the rulers of China have claimed descent for eons and ages and great time periods, and that they can trace their lineage right back to the very stars from whence they were fallen. So you see, this is talking about the present, it's talking about the past, and what great glories they actually had in outer space. And then here is the last stand, so to speak. And they took over this world and this earth, and they were trying to repeat of the things that they did in outer space. But few people have ever understood this. But you see, it was for a plan or a divine purpose, because the Almighty himself, speaking of Pharaoh here, he said, "I raised him up as a tool, as a weapon, that he might glorify himself in, my dear friends. He might teach you and I, his offspring, the household of the Almighty. He might teach us a lesson." In other words, the Almighty, he tells Pharaoh, "You were there, and you were a mighty tree too, but not as great as that of the Assyrian. I have already just broken Assyria, and I'll break you down too, because you were also in Eden, in the garden of God too, and thy dynasties of old, of the ancient great days of antiquity, of glory, which those were residing under the Pharaoh in Egypt, who no longer even dreamed of. It was lost in the veil and the fog of ancient times, even though the Almighty tried to bring it to their remembrance and to those of the Asiatic and the poor lost white boys." You read in the 31st chapter, you look at the rivers. Here, as I've said before, they're racial streams. You look at the empires and the great trees which God points out that they have come from, and you still discover something that in this chapter that the Almighty tells the prophet to go tell, "O Pharaoh, and the days of Eden and the Egyptian dynasties were extinct, and the Assyrian dynasties were all over the earth, and the most powerful dynasties at that time. Now we have over possibly 600,000 years of the tracing of the people that make up the great Assyrian dynasties. We have no trouble at all with 240,000 years of great history from the part of the Sumerian, the Akkadian people. So we have the fact here before us that the Almighty, in His own words, He proves that the Assyrian Empire and the Egyptians, they were in Eden. I don't care whether people like that or not. But all of them, like the white man, they're a fallen race. Now let us return back to the flood. The Egyptians, he could not have descended from Noah and his 3 sons if the Egyptians were a great empire in Eden, could they? Now the Assyrian could not have descended from any of the sons of Noah, and they were also a great empire in the days of Eden, could they? The Assyrians are still with us. Right now they're over in Moscow, and would to heaven that they would have drowned. They didn't, in fact. A lot of these people call themselves today, they still call themselves Assyrians. But are these people the ones that are leaving Russia and going to Israel? I wonder about that. Now, I'm not talking about Arabs. I'm talking about the Assyrians of the Bible, which were an Asiatic type people. But now that there has been such a great mixture going on between them and some of the Semitic people, that you're confused. But I believe Matthew and different scriptures in the Bible said that, oh, mercy, I'm trying to think which one of those Bibles. Well, I'll skip it for right now, but in the footnotes, it said that they would be so mixed in with the children of God that only the angels would be able to discern them. We find in the history of the Scriptures, I take you to Isaiah, and I can take you to Jeremiah, we can take you to Ezekiel, we can show the Assyrian Empire long after the flood and long after the days of empire, and we're still upon the face of the earth. Now, let me call your attention to something else. You don't have to research it, but I'd like you to have you do that, and that is if you start where you're told to start, to read the descendants of Adam till you get to Noah, and we want you to notice here, you'll have every major family coming out of the Sethites, at which time they were all Aryans. And you remember, my dear friends, we talked about in the Egyptian dynasties and Horus how they fought against evil Seth. The audacity of those people to call the offspring in the household of the ever-living, eternal Almighty, to call His children evil Seth. But as they wrote in their ancient books of the dead, which is an erroneous modern translation, what they're saying in all of the different books of the dead written by the different pharaohs, they were trying to make their peace with the eternal, as they said, that they might return back to the house of life. What they're saying, that they might once again gain, as did the sons and daughters of God, immortality, eternal life. Now, when you come down to the time of Noah and the so-called flood, with its names of all the descendants that came from Ham, Shem, and Japheth for a period of time, right up to the days of Abraham, then you have their story right here in Genesis. It just follows in continuity after the flood. And all of the significant things about this is that these dynasties, you have the story of the kings, even of Nimrod, who ruled over Ur of the Chaldees. Now I want you to notice Nimrod, he was a descendant of Ham, and Nimrod had selected Abraham's father, Terah, for his prime minister. It said that Ham's children were Negroes, and Japheth's children were Asiatics, and Shem's children were white. That, my friends, is one of the most silly bedtime stories that the pseudo-world of Christendom has ever swallowed or had to choke down, because I'm just going to give you a clue, a little piece of biology here. That is, when Noah and his wife, let's say they did have 3 sons before the flood, and the children were of the same race as their parents, and the Bible tells me kind begets like kind, seed after having life in itself. Now, don't ever take a chance on raising a family if that doesn't hold true. You know as well as I do, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, these three men of renown here, these so-called sons of Noah and their wife, that they would have to be just like their mother and father, the pure strain of Semitic man. But you say they married a bad set of women. But these three women, they were picked, if this is true, because they knew the law. Moses was spared because he and his house were righteous. It said the Father had grace towards them, and we are told by Scripture. Now, I'm not some Nazi racist, as somebody will probably want to make me out. I had nothing to do with the flood, and I didn't make no decision that I know of to drown any of those people. But you see, they were drowned, pardon me, because of their bad habits. Now let's suppose I would assume here that these men all married white men, and they would, or otherwise they wouldn't have gotten on the ark. They say they're married, and afterwards a lot of people try to tell us outside of their race, and their descendants did. And you say Ham was cursed because of this, and he was made a Negro. No, my friends, we won't go into all the details of it, but he violated a moral code, and his offspring was a child of incest, which meant he could never share with his brothers and sisters their inheritance, and that curse was put on Ham as one of authority and of the administrative destinies here. Ham did not, but then nor any time thereafter turned back, and none of their children ever turned black, is what I meant to say, not back, but black. Now, because we find skeletal remains of the Negroid race that have been found in the caves of Kilimanjaro in Africa that go back approximately 73,000, 75,000 years ago, they used radiocarbon testing for an exactness of science that God developed for our race as a means of measure that we can prove that the remains of these blacks were Negro skulls approximately 75,000 years ago. They certainly didn't come from Noah and his sons in a period of Earth's history, which, if we go along with these reports, it goes back only 5,000 years or so ago. Of course, there are many who say that everybody who descended from Cush was a Negro. Do you know where Cush got his name? Cush was named after the river Cush, and it is not the African one. It is the one that was up in India. It was an area that was named Cush, and he got his name from it. He did not father that area, nor, my friends, did he beget any Negroes. He had nothing to do with it. Some of his race may have been absorbed by the Negroes at a later date. Now, when Nimrod was the emperor of Ur, he was a bronze-skinned white man, tanned only by the sun, because we have today pictures, we find these pictures on the wall of Nimrod of Ur, and they showed him with his golden bracelets and his war chariots and his great hunting dogs as he went out after lions and cheetahs and all the other animals that were available. And you will note that he, the royalty that surrounded him were of white men. These and their servants were Nubians, but Nimrod was a white man who even then had a bunch of these people that were strange to his race around him. I want you to keep this in mind. Just remember that these strange forces that gathered around Nimrod were offered to him to deify him into the cycle of evil philosophies coming out of Asia. And if he would make all of those people of Ur mingle together and form one empire, he could become the greatest of kings. And they were going to form back then what would be equivalent to the United Nations. And they were selling this white man descended from Ham as being the head of the whole thing, and oh my. But they had a great picture built up in that day on how to do it. And this is why we're telling you that you couldn't have started the Negroes out of Ham, because his offspring were not Negroid. By the time that we reached Nimrod, he had become a rebel against God, and by so doing he brought great catastrophe upon he and his people and his empire that could have been the greatest that the world had ever known. So if you think the Almighty doesn't want racial purity, if you think God doesn't segregate, and if you think that the stories that some of these preachers are telling us is true, that all of the people on the face of this earth ought to be brought together to make one great homogeneous city, that I believe, what's the word, like a megalopolis, that would be a belt of a city just running around the world, one world and one government and one theology, then why do you think the Almighty called Abraham to come out of that city? His father was already the prime minister, and he was probably of the finest and the purest Israelite strain, along with the strongest faith of them all. He should have kept him there, shouldn't he? Now, if the idea of God is just plain faith among all the pagans, then Abraham would have stayed there. No, the Almighty wanted this pure, new strain, the purest line of his race, to remain pure. But remember, this young boy was 10 years of age, and he was called Abram, and was educated in the household of the family of Noah. We have the record in the book of Jasher. Oh, well, that may be a death knell again. So it was that Abraham was told by the Most High to get out of the land of the Ur of the Chaldees, because... Please turn to the other side, and we will continue with our subject. Thank you. Father unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, and let me tell you, you're going to be the father of a multitude of nations. Your name's going to be great, and they're going to try to pour all of these promises into Israel. The one that we know today, that's supposedly one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But this is one of the biggest fairy tales ever perpetrated on the people. Is try to think that this one little nation, a group of people over in the land of Israel, that they constitute the 12 tribes of Israel. Now these are the pages of history which are of the most significance to you. I want you to remember in the travels of Abram that he was not a poor man. He went out with his wife Sarah, Sherry, and later was called Sarah. And there traveled with him a nephew also, a few of his family and the servants of his household. He went out with his sheep, and he went out with his cattle, and he went with his ownership, and he started to travel out of the land where his father was already the prime minister. Why? Because he believed the Almighty. And in the course of his travels, I want you to remember this chapter because of its significance. It tells us that it was come to pass in those days in the great plain of Shinar that, let's see, what was his name? Aruk, the king of Elziar, and trying to think of that king of Elam and the title king of the nations. Now, let's see, what was it? Shedor Lamer, who was the king of Elam, if I'm pronouncing his name right, in their empires. They had made war with Bera, who was the king of Sodom, and it was Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Birsha. Now then we have Shinab, Shinab, who was the king of Adamah, Admah. And then there was the Shemeber, who was the king of Shiboam, and the kings of Bela, which is in Zoar. You say, what's this got to do with it? I'm going to tell you something. None of these men descended from the sons of Noah. For we have in a previous chapter that I don't know if I've included in this one, a listing of all of the descendants of every empire and every people at that time that had descended from Noah. Now here we have a set of kings, and not one of them came from Noah. And strangely enough, none of them came from Adam either. My, a lot of people get all emotional and they get upset when we talk to them about pre-Adamite peoples. I remember just a very few years ago, I was lecturing at a place in Arkansas, and I had a bunch of little old ladies that came up to me, I forget before or after the meeting, and they said, Mr. Fredericks, we understand that you believe in and you promote the theory that pre-Adamic people existed before the advent of the creation of Adam. And so I said, ladies, you mean you do not concur with me? You do not believe this? Well, most definitely not. Our Bible doesn't say anything about that. And so the head lady pontificator, I asked her, just what Bible do you recommend? And I see that you carry a large economist size under your arm, and I'm most impressed. And could you tell me which one it is? Well, I must be honest with you, I had already seen which one she was carrying. It was the Schofield. And I asked her if she had read it thoroughly. She said, oh yes. So I begin to point out to her in Matthew some of the footnotes and some of the footnotes of Genesis and so forth, where Schofield went into great detail about pre-Adamic people that had preceded the Adamic man eons and ages long before he appeared upon the scene. And so they became very indignant over that. But strangely enough, as I said, that these kings, they did not come from Adam. They did not come from Noah. And you say, well, where did they come from? Well, I'll tell you where they came from, my friends. They came from pre-Adamic races, these great fallen angelic hosts, those who were dumped off here on this planet. They were fugitives. They were pilgrims from another world, another galaxy. All one has to do is sit down and do a very brief study of the book of Jude. It's a very small book right next to Revelation, and it doesn't take over 5-10 minutes to read it, but it may take you quite a bit of time to absorb it, and I would recommend that you get a Bible that has a good cross-reference in it. And you will find that you could spend many hours of study and research in that. Now, I ask a lot of people, have you ever heard of Emphriel? If you haven't, you'd better read not only the book of Enoch, but you'd better read of the mysteries which the early church used to put out, the writings of Clement and Polycarp concerning the order of the angels, for Amphriel was a fallen angel who sowed his dynasties in the earth, and he ruled with evil kingdoms by the side of the adversary of the children of the Most High. Now how about this title, King of Nations? You go back to the writings of Horace, and you go back into the writings of the antediluvians and the ancients, and go back before these catastrophes that preceded the birth of your race, or let's not say that, let's say the appearance here upon this planet, and you will discover they called those lands that because they were washed with water in the sinking of continents, and so they were entitled the tidal land. Now a lot of people assume that it was here on earth, and they try to use this pointing to Atlantis and Mur and a lot of these ancient lands that are just whispered about that leak through the fog of great antiquity. And so we all, with the earthbound ideas, we're so earthly conscious, we're no heavenly good. But, my friends, I believe that this was talking about in days of antiquity, and also covered other lands and worlds and planets. Now we find that this title, King of Nation, he was a king or a ruler over the whole area of survivors from the land that a lot of historians believe plunged beneath the waters of the Atlantic. The ancients' new title is King of the Nations, and his dynasty is a part of the dynasties of Sumeria, which means that he was a part of the Asiatic people who talked about how their lands were plunged beneath the water and how they were forced to migrate into new territories. And then you find, if you research into the studies and the writings of ancient Sumeria, they've also coined a word for the motherland, later used as the word Mu. Were they talking about a continent that many people have assumed that went beneath the Pacific, and from which the word Sumeri, or high survivors in Japan, that they got their names. Now, as we point out to you now, that when Abraham, he came across the plain of, I'll spell this for you in case you want to look it up, Chedorlaomer, Chedorlaomer, which is what it was called because it was where the battle took place. There was a great struggle that took place between this king, which was called Chedorlaomer, and had named the whole area after himself, and the battle was his battle. But all 9 of these ancient kings were fighting, as we told you before, for this mysterious gold of Ophir. Now we find that these fallen angelic hosts who had established the dynasties over men, we have the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, and cities where they were the most rotten and filthy on the face of the earth, even worse than some of our areas of Los Angeles and the East Coast. Some people don't like that, but let me tell you something. Do you know what it made it evil? It was the people dwelling there who produced the immorality and the corruption that spread all over the land, just like these venereal diseases and the people who are spreading them in our nation that is now in epidemic stages. But if you study the book of Genesis, you learn more about Sodom and Gomorrah, and you will learn that the angels of God who came to visit Lot, the nephew of Abram, who made his seat there. And by the way, I think I pointed out to you that there's archaeological evidence discovered as of late in recent years that he was the mayor. No wonder he didn't want to leave. Now, the fallen angels who inhabited these cities were so evil, they even tried to do violence to the angels of God who came to see Lot. I think that they tried to seduce them, and you go back and you read it very carefully. It proves that they were extraterrestrials, and they must have pulled out some sort of ray gun, because it made these evil, wicked people, it made them blind, and they groped along the walls, and they couldn't find these sons of God that had come to Lot. Now, Lot had made his home in Sodom because he thought he could do good business there with these people, just as a lot of people today have made their peace with the Babylonian, or the modern repetition, shall we say, of Babylon, because they think it's good business. Now, as I said just a little while ago, you go ahead and you read the book of Jude in the New Testament, and you'll discover that these were these fallen angelic hosts who kept, as Jude says, not their first estate, and they were intermingling with the people, and they were producing an unassimilatable evil offspring that were diametrically opposed to the teachings and the truth of the Almighty, and they totally rejected. We find the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, that they belonged to the dynasties of these fallen angels here on this earth, and they and their offspring and their generations, they didn't come from Adam. They did not come from Noah, and they were about 3 million of them, that they were ready to battle with Abraham and cross the plain. And they did not come, my friends, out of the dynasties of Noah. You keep that in mind, through Ham, Shem, or Japheth. And you're going to have to admit that the flood, it didn't drown everybody. When you go back and you check the 14th chapter of the book of Genesis, and you try to trace the genealogy of these kings, I want you to know and understand, you're forced to face the fact that God put a lot of evidence in here for people to understand if they only would. Now, someone repeats, but it still says over the earth, the word, my friend, is erats. As I've said, that country, that land. Remember the story how Cain killed his brother Abel, and when he was going to be driven off the land, he cries out in fear because the majesty of Yahweh and his glory was hovering over the family, and Cain was afraid, and he knew that he was going to be driven off his original estate, because remember I said he killed him in the field, and I explained to you before how they met upon the field of battle. So it was not one individual. It was, once again, I've got to recite to you the idioms and the etymology that explains this, that there was probably a whole world that perished. And he went on to say, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. He was talking about his earth, his world. Now, what do you think he was afraid of? If there wasn't anybody else. When people go back and tell you they're just Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and this is all the people that are on the face of the earth, next breath you say, what about when he went east of Eden, took himself a wife and built a great city? That was quite a honeymoon task. But they can't get it through their head that they were driven off one earth to another planet. Now we know that he wasn't afraid of his father, and he wasn't afraid of his mother, and he said, everyone will be turned against me. Who was every man? Every man was referring to these pre-Adamic people, to the many populations of great ancient civilizations, and mighty forces of earth-shaking conquerors from Assyria and from Egypt, then existing already at this time upon the earth, and the mark of Cain was upon him. So we know that Cain went out of the land of the Akkad, as they told us in the ancient times. He took a wife from among the Akkadian people. Now, a lot of people today, they're mystified, and we have our scholars, we say we don't know who these ancient people were. But I believe if they check and use a little reason, they would find that they were the ancient Turanians, and probably descendants of Turanians and the Bactrians, who in descent there is where he found the dynasty, where the records of history are later to call the dynasties of Sargon, an Assyrian conqueror for Cain. I believe he had a lot of descendants. He was probably the original Sargon the Magnificent. Then there was Sargon the Great, and he was a mighty ruler over Assyria, and we find, as we have the story again, of something of great significance. I am asked, but is all of this important? Yes, my friends, it's very important. It's important that you know the difference between the family of God on this earth today and those who are not of the family of God, are not going to stand with family of God, that you might know your destiny, and that you might preserve your heritage and your people and your self-respect with prayer and faith, and have a testimony, and you shall re-quicken and revitalize your nation, and your elected representatives will either do your will or they'll be replaced. I guarantee you, my friend, this earth will be swept with the knowledge of the Most High. We're already moving across the face of the nation and the world, and we find people waking up all over. And it doesn't always take a great number of people, just those that have some self-respect left, that will stand and they will back it. And we have the records of the history of your people. It's anthropology and it's archaeology and it's biblical history. And I can show you the great panoramas of civilization and archaeological records and traditions and history, which the average history course that you're taught in school of these civilizations, they could be put in a single textbook. But yet it would take hundreds of textbooks to unravel and to fill in this history, and the translation and the chronology of these events are staggering. And it's much easier to say, well, civilization, the records, the writings, only started about 5,000 years ago before Christ or so. Then you don't have to do so much thinking. You don't have to study or research. Isn't it strange, though, that we spent so many millions of dollars through time to research our records of great antiquity, and now what do? We cover them all up, and we try to foster this new one world government they've been working on since time immemorial, and to suppress the kingdom of God and hide it and understand that they're against it, and the truths which we're trying to teach and to unfold and restore once again to the memory banks of the Almighty's people. And I explain why is that so. I will have more to say on this matter and further messages, and then I'm going to show you a mystery. But now I want you to turn to the book of Romans and read it for yourself, starting with the 16th verse of chapter 8, where it says, the Spirit itself, we're talking to the Almighty, bears witness with our spirit that we are truly the children and the offspring of the Most High. And if children, then we're heirs and heirs of God, and joint heirs with the incarnate Christ, who is the embodiment of the eternal Heavenly Father. Therefore we know that the offspring of this present time are not worthy, or the sufferings, I'm trying to say, they're not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us, His people, His children, His offspring. For it says that the earnest expectation of the creature, talking about us who've taken on the creature bodies, like the rest of them, we're waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. And I say to you, my friends, manifestation, it comes from the word manna feast, meaning you are what you eat. And people are spiritual pygmies today because they're not growing. They have no spiritual soul food. They're stagnated. So let me explain what is happening. The body that you live in, your creature body, begotten out of the physical substance of a physical world by the Most High, and the other races, which are all created races, who dwell in bodies of flesh and blood, and out of the very elements of this earth, they're also creatures of the creation. But inside of you, you have a treasure in these earthen vessels. You are a child of spirit, and our creature bodies, under the violation of divine law, are subject to the disturbance of the law of life. We're affected by the policies of the adversary, the Most High, and we have no time to go into all of this now, but out of it comes virtue. When we realize that the negative things that we're taught, we bring upon ourselves these viruses and diseases and mutations and death, and the world around, these creature bodies, we find suffering and pain and sorrow and death. And also you and your creature body, you get sick and you know pain as well. But we know that we have the promise of a day when all of this is going to end, and the great enveloping glory of your Heavenly Father that belongs to you by right, by inheritance, that your race, that you will be given once again, or restored to you immortality, and will envelop and balance every essence of your being and every atom of your body. Know this, my friends. It is not, my friends, a vain hope. It is an anchor hope. It is a scientific thing. And more than that, the people of this earth and all the people that think have an expectation of a hope of a better day. And these people may know, and we should teach them what they're waiting for. But the Apostle Paul said, every creature waiteth with earnest expectation for the manifestation of the sons of God, which is your race and glory. And our creature bodies, too, who are made subject to the sense and to feeling, to vitality, he says, because you're waiting, the whole creature body, because the creature itself is waiting to be delivered from the corruption and from death into the glorious liberty that comes to us as the children of the Most High. Now, I remember some years ago that many times I would try to go into this in great detail and pass this along, give people something to believe in. but those who had made themselves my superiors and whose pulpit I was sharing in, they told me, don't talk like that, you'll confuse the people. Now I want you to hear these next words, for we know it says that all creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. Why does he say together? Because there is a difference between our species and theirs. There's a difference between our race and theirs. Even though that we are the children of heaven, that we are pilgrims here on the earth, as I said, that we were kicked out and lost our first estate in space, that we are dwelling in physical bodies under a judgment that the Almighty himself set aside upon in his own ministry. But now listen, we're waiting for a day, a great day, and we're waiting to enter into it now. Listen to these words by Paul. Not only they, but ourselves also, who are the first fruits of the Spirit, the first begotten of the Father, where? In the plains of the Spirit. These was before this world was framed, when we were his children. Not only they, but their creature beings, but we also, who are the first fruits of his Spirit, waiting for that day. Now, let me read this to you in conclusion of this passage. We're waiting, what? For the positioning of time, to wit, the redemption of our body. The word adoption used in the King James Version means positioning of time. My friends, everything has a cycle. Everything in the book has a time. We're trying to get our spirits saved. So they would have us think that this is all there is to it to have eternal life. We're trying to get our souls adjusted with truth, and we're waiting for the day that we shall put on immortality and have what we call a redemption of our body. This is what your race is waiting for today, and all of the other races, because you are the umbrella. You are the one that's responsible. You who wait for this day that you might be redeemed, so that all of these other people may rejoice under your kindness and mercy and safety. And that is due to the fact of the redemption of your body, the re-empowering of God's Spirit, which it renews your minds or quickens you, which means you'll be brought to life and will put you again upon the course of divine destiny, when this kingdom shall come into its fullness, and the nations of this world shall worship the Father which resides in outer space, who is your Father, and all of the nations of this world shall become the kingdoms of our Lord and our Savior and his Christ. For we were not sent into the world, neither floods nor catastrophes have stopped us. They never will, and for they were only used, my friends, by divine hands to preserve us and our race and this household. And we know that there is going to be no end, because the Almighty has promised it and swore it, and he will accomplish it through you. You are his representatives here. If the Almighty was going to do everything, why did he bother to send you here? And it's time for us to quit playing around like the world was a nursery. It's time for us to go on to higher learning and to graduate. We will conclude this tape here, and we thank you for listening. If you lose any of your tapes and you want to get one of our copyrighted tapes, write Pilgrim Ships, Lakeview, Missouri, P.O. Box 1086, 65737. I can never remember our ghetto number. Thank you so much for listening.